everyone, it's Mrs. Shannon here, and we are getting ready to go through Activity 5, Gene Squares. And so to help you out, you can follow along with this video. I am going to be reading the assignment just like you would and modeling how to complete it as we go along, but I'm also going to be adding in extra information and material to help make it a little bit more understandable. So before we get started here, really quickly, by the time that we finish with Activity 5, there's two things that you're going to be able to do. You're going to create something and you're going to be able to look at it and analyze it. Analyze it means understand it. So you're going to create a model of what we call a Punnett square or a gene square. And it's a model that's used to calculate the probability of a trait being passed from a parent to an offspring. So we're going to learn how to create it. You will create it. You will create boxes and to set up a Punnett square. But then you're also going to be able to analyze the Punnett squares and figure out what it means. How can that be used to calculate the probability? And you're going to determine that. Okay, so before we get started, a little bit of a review from Activity 4 Gene Combo. And in Activity 4, you had to flip a coin to determine the color of the tail as it was being passed on. And either you use an actual coin or you use the online simulation, but in each case, the idea was the same. So we're going to think about what we did there and the questions that were asked. And I want you to think about, suppose you were to toss a coin. You toss it up in the air, catch it 20 times. Predict how many times the coin will land with heads up and how many times it will land with tails up. So take a moment and think about that. Is it heads up 5 times, 10 times, 15 times? How would you figure that out? Okay. So let's think about a coin for a second. So a coin has two options. It has a head or a tail. When we're talking about the probability of an event occurring, the probability is used to predict the results of something happening, a particular event. Maybe the event is tails coming up. Maybe the event is heads coming up. Here we can see that there's two different possible events that could happen. Either the tails or the heads will land up. We express probability as a number. That's what the symbol is here. It's a symbol, it's a number that describes how likely an event will occur. Okay. So what is the chance of getting ahead? We have two possible events, a tails or a head landing up. What is the chance of getting ahead? So since there are only two ways a coin can land, so two possible events, you can say that there is a 1 in 2 chance of it landing heads up or a 1 in 2 chance of it landing tails up. One possibility out of the two possible events. Now, when we're talking about probability, though, we write it as a number. And so the two most common ways that you'll see it are as a fraction or a ratio sometimes. So 1 out of 2 possibilities can be heads. Or 1/2 is the same as 50%. So we usually use either a fraction or a percentage to express probability. So if you toss a coin 5 times and each time it lands heads up, now I have another question for you. What would you expect to find if you tossed it one more time, if you toss it again? Would the 6th time be heads up as well? Does the probability change? Hopefully you realize that probability does not change. It still has an equal chance of landing heads up. There is still a 50% or a 1 in 2 chance, regardless on what the previous situations were. The probability does not change because each of these tosses occurs independently of each other. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start this activity. Now I'm going to have you pause it in a few spots along the way. And part of it is so you can add information into your notebook, and part of it is just so we can break it up and give you a little break so you can process the information. So we're going to read the introduction and look for the key ideas in Activity 5 Gene Squares. Now, in your notebook, in your slides, in your notebook, there's the English text. If you need Spanish, please go to LabAid's portal. I'm on the introduction. Read the introduction for the activity as well as the review of probability in Activity 4 in the video on the right. So this is the video that you're watching right now. You can follow along or you can read it on your own using the link here for the actual text. To help us, I have actually put it in our slides. So remember, we're talking about Joe. Remember Joe? He went to the doctor. They said he might have Marfan syndrome, and he's been in this dilemma, like, should he seek out assistance? So we're going to go back and think about Joe now that he's learned a little bit about probability and he's learned a little bit about how many alleles come together to form a trait. And Joe wonders what chance he would have at transmitting Marfan syndrome to his children someday if he does have the gene. Remember, that was one of the trade-offs of getting tested, is to find out if he did have it, and if he did, it might affect his children. He asks the genetic counselor for help. She shows him a model to help him figure out the chance, but cautions him that the model predicts only what is likely to happen, not what will happen. Now, remember, that's something important to note. Models are limited. They can only tell you so much. They cannot predict. It's not a fortune-telling device. We use models just to get the best idea of what we're interested in, and in this case, probability. So in previous activities, you learned that each offspring receives half of its genes from one parent and half from the other parent, okay? Two parents. You also learned that different versions of genes are called alleles. So I'm reading this, but I am also stopping to think to myself, yes, the alleles, I remember that because we had two forms of tail color traits. We had orange and blue. I remember that. We had two options for our coin, heads and tails. So you use coin tosses to model the way alleles are passed from parents to offspring in activity 4. You observe that each offspring received 2 alleles, one from each parent, mom and dad, biological mom and dad. In the simulation to determine tail color, if one parent contributed a blue tail color allele, we're going to call that capital T to signify it, and the other parent contributed an orange tail color allele, which will symbolize with a lowercase t. The allele combination was big T, little t, and we call that the critter's genotype for that characteristic. So stop there. Genotype. If we don't have it in our Quizlet vocab deck, we're going to need to add that to it. But a genotype is the letter combination. The letters represent the alleles, the version. So I got one blue tail allele and one orange tail allele, and together those letters together, those alleles together form the genotype. Okay? So now let's go back on to the reading. Because the allele for the blue tail was dominant, the big T, little t combination caused the physical appearance of the tail to be blue. Okay, dominant means that that's what we see. We call the critter's physical appearance its phenotype. Now look, these words are kind of the same. They both have type in it. Okay, so there's a relationship here. Geno looks at the actual gene, the alleles. Okay, it doesn't tell us what it looks like, but it shows that there's something different here. One big capital, one lowercase. Phenotype is the actual physical expression, what we see. In this activity, you will learn how a table called a Punnett square can help you model and predict the genotypes and phenotypes of offspring. Okay, so that is our introduction that I just read and modeled with you. And notice that I stopped and I thought and I added information based on what I've already done as I read through. And you should do that too. As you're reading, if you can bring in information from previous activities, do so. So our guiding question for this activity, is how can we model and predict the ratios of traits observed in the offspring of parents with two versions of a trait? You're going to now stop this video. It says pause here in case you're watching the entire one, or just stop the video and copy this question into your notebook. Notice this is part of our objectives. We're going to create a model and we're going to analyze it to predict, okay, to understand it. So these are the two things that we're going to be doing. So go to your introduction, and I want you to type it in right there. And we're going to go ahead and stop it now.